Welcome to the podcast, Chris Graham, and I've got Scott German with me here today. We're going to talk some UVA basketball in particular, and we scheduled this to talk about the coaching search. But then you've got to maybe get into the basketball game from last night first, Scott, just real quick. My post-game story about the game, Scott, was more about how Wake blew an opportunity than Virginia took advantage of one, I guess, because for Virginia, our guys are playing out the string, but Wake Forest, they might be playing out the string too, I guess. Losing to a Virginia team at home, that's a quad three loss. I'm happy for the Virginia kids that they got the win, but man, what is going on with the ACC and Wake Forest blowing that game?
Chris, I wrote earlier or yesterday that I thought for Wade and Pitt, the only path they had to the NCAA tournament was an ACC championship, or at least at bare minimum an appearance. And that Wake ended that discussion last night, and we texted back and forth between the games. First of all, I'm very happy that Virginia won. Always happy when we get a win, but I was more, just it was just the eye test last night of Wake Forest under Steve Forbes. This is not a one time deal. This is a pattern for them at the end of the season that they just seem to quit. And they have just been awful. In a bad ACC, they are right now playing about as bad a ball as the bottom couple teams are.
They were 10-3 just a couple of weeks ago in the ACC. They've lost three of their last four. They blew a big lead to Florida State at home and lost to Florida State, another team that they shouldn't lose to. Going to NC State and getting blown out, not blown out, but they lost late in that game. They got blown out. They ended up losing by double digits. Couldn't score in the last couple of minutes, last 3 or 4 minutes of the game. And then last night, giving up 83 points to Virginia. Yeah, Steve Forbes, I looked at his record. If you just looked at the record and didn't pay attention to the way their seasons ended, you say that's a good record. It's not great. One year they won 25 games, couple 20-win seasons. He's not been to an NCAA tournament there yet, and he's in year five. He's not going to make it this year. I mean, now they could still win the ACC tournament. They're not going to, but they still could. What's odd, Scott, is that I don't put a lot of stock into the experts. Joe Lunardi is supposedly the expert on bracketology. Going into last night's game, he had Wake Forest as his last team in the tournament. So all they had to do was beat the bad teams on their schedule. They had three home games with teams that they should beat by 10 points or more. They had a game. They have one game in between at Duke, which is a quad one opportunity. But they didn't need the quad one. If your thinking is that they're already in the tournament, just hold serve, win your games against the teams you're supposed to beat. If you lose a Duke, whatever, maybe go win a game in the ACC tournament, and then before you bow out. No, now at this point, they got to probably beat Duke and still do some stuff down in Charlotte.
Yeah, definitely. Chris, first you said the experts. The thing I'm learning is that, especially when it concerns ACC basketball, uh, I'm not seeing any experts around because the more I read, the more I don't want to read about some of the some of the stories that are being written about coaching searches, about teams on the bubble, teams off the bubble, blah blah. It's just ridiculous. Um, I think it's very obvious the ACC is just a horrifically weak conference this year, with the exception of the top three teams, Duke, Louisville, Clemson. You mentioned they didn't get blown out by State. Wake did on Saturday. State's having a kind of season. They were 3-13, 10 straight, 9 straight losses. Anytime you lose to NC State, you might as well say you were blown out because that team has just been a terrible disappointment. That Wake had no business losing that game Saturday, nor did they have any business losing the game last night. It's just obvious that they are playing out this season right now.
I'm looking at the Ken Palm conference ratings. It's an easy, quick way to look at things. The ACC is fifth among the 31 conferences. I'm looking at there are 11. that get a net rating that's positive, going all the way down to Missouri Valley, which is 11th. If you want to call, I mean, the way I look at this, the net rating, it's probably there's probably a big six if you include the Mountain West, which is sixth, which is just behind the ACC in the rankings. There's a big difference between 4 and 5 though. The Big East is has a net rating of 4 points higher than the ACC. The Southeastern Conference is lapping everybody at this stage. But yeah, so this is definitely a down ACC. When I look back even to 2019, I can look there real quick. ACC, now that year is interesting. That year, the ACC had three number one seeds. It was still the third rated conference. Let me go back to say 2014. ACC was still third back in 2014. That's interesting. Um, go all the way back to 2005. We were number one. So it's been a decline that's now hastened in the last couple of years. This gets us to where we are now because I know I can predict Scott's next comment, which is the coaching stock in this conference isn't what it was. Yeah. I mean, Scott, lay the case out because I don't want to lay the case out for you. That seems to be obviously where things are.
Chris, what they talk about the inequity of money between the conferences, the ACC, the SEC, the Big Ten, and yes, there is definitely an inequity there in the revenue that those three conferences make. The ACC pales in comparison, but that applies more to football than it does basketball because as we've talked off air before, basketball does not require as much of a financial commitment. You invest in three, four players and then have some good role players, just like they do in the NBA. With the big three, so to speak, that teams are always trying to attain. The difference in the ACC and the other two conferences right now has strictly originated from we just have rotten coaches right now. We just a few years ago we had Coach K, we had Roy Williams, we had Tony Bennett, we had Jim Boeheim, we had Jim Larinaga, who is vastly underrated for his career, and whoever we replaced him with. Aside from Coach Sanchez at UVA, the others are we don't know yet about Miami. We don't. We know Boeheim's successor has not been good. Hubert Davis at North Carolina, he's not exactly gotten a vote of confidence there. It's coaching, and from the folks that I've talked to that have been in this business, they will tell you stop making it an issue about money. It's about coaching and the program's lack of investment in getting the big names there that attract the players.
To the point about money, I pulled up the Sportico database that gives you access to so many things. And among the things you can look at is men's basketball total operating revenues. Now, these numbers are 2 years old because, schools report their IRS stuff. It takes a while for all that to go through. So this is for 2022, 2023. Among the top 20 schools in spending in 2022, 2023, seven were in the Big Ten, six were in the SEC, five were in the ACC. And the number one team, and actually two of the top three are ACC. Louisville, number one, North Carolina, number three, in terms of total operating revenues. So to your point, it's not money or lack thereof. Any conference, any group of whatevers, you lose, okay, Coach K, Jim Boeheim, Roy Williams, Tony Bennett, now soon to be Leonard Hamilton. You lose guys like that who've been around forever, who win games consistently, and then replace them with different people. I mean, Jim Larinaga, I forgot. God, how can a guy's been to two Final Fours himself with two different programs. You can't lose that quality and expect there not to be some kind of a drop off, at least even initially. And only in the case of those schools who've lost guys, only Duke has maintained what it was before. At least in terms of consistent winning. They haven't been haven't been to a Final Four since Coach K stepped away, but they're still consistently winning. So yeah, you can't lose that talent and expect to just maintain what you have. So I don't look at it though, Scott, as the ACC is irreparably broken. I look at it more as, all right, we're in a period of transition. You got to figure it out. Syracuse, I don't think Syracuse is has got their situation solved. They gave their job to the longtime top assistant. I don't know that that's going to be the solution. Duke gave it to an assistant who seems to be running fine. North Carolina just extended the guy that they probably shouldn't have extended, Hubert Davis, but they did. They extended him. In Virginia's case, which we'll be talking about here as the primary thrust of this podcast, we got to figure it out too. So, but you and Miami has to figure it out as well. So no, that's the problem. I mean, you're replacing generational talents, and it's just not that easy to do that.
But it's not permanently broken, and I think that's what you just mentioned. And there is a fix there, and we know it, and it's still it's still a really good conference that you still. I'm sorry, I'm old enough to know Tobacco Road still means something in college basketball, and it will always mean something. And there's schools there, North Carolina, Duke. This is. I'm sorry, I hate to inform Bill Belichick, but North Carolina's still a basketball school, uh, and they always will be.
Well,
And
they also just won the women's soccer national championship again. Dean Smith always said they were a women's soccer school.
well, he was probably correct. Um, so this can be fixed. And I don't think the fix is necessarily finding a way to bridge the difference in the in the revenue disparity. I think that's a part of it, and I think they need to obviously look at that. But the fix is just to make sure these schools that have ongoing coaching searches right now make an investment in not only the school but the conference by not for lack of a better word going cheap on hiring somebody that is a hit and miss. Now, even a big name coach could be a hit and miss. I realize that, but I'm still looking at you going on a reputation, a resume, as compared to someone that's won at a lower level that you just don't know how they're going to perform um, at the marquee level that the ACC will be playing in again. They're not playing there now. If you watch enough games, it's embarrassing the lack of attendance at some of these games, but they will be. They'll get that back, and I think it just stems from hiring the right coach, which is kind of a segue into the Virginia coaching search. Um, can we just permanently stop talking about, well, Sanchez is playing his way back into this,
Um,
or we you and I disagree on that? Because I just before we went on air, I just did a Virginia's got 7 wins in the ACC, 7-10. The combined record of the seven wins that they have, and they played one opponent twice. That's Tech. The combined record is 46 wins and 80 losses. And they also have two bad losses against Notre Dame, 6-11, Cal 5-12. So, you know, we've got 7 wins, but again, in a bad conference, those 7 wins haven't been against very good teams.
all right. Well,
With the exception of Wake Forest.
I might have to jump ahead in the discussion here to say, there's lessons learned, and I wrote a column about this yesterday. And Scott, you and I had this conversation, and I've had the conversation with a couple other people. Lessons learned from 1990 in Virginia basketball lore. Terry Holland. I keep getting these names. Terry Holland stepped down unexpectedly, and
Tony
actually,
Holland would have been a hell of a basketball coach.
oh man, or Terry Bennett.
Yeah, or Terry Bennett.
Get them all together. No, Terry Holland stepped down unexpectedly, and actually a few years earlier in his life compared to Tony Bennett. Tony was, or Terry, Terry and Tony. Terry was only 49 when he stepped down unexpectedly in 1990, citing a health issue that had popped up. Now, it was inopportune because the heir apparent was Dave Odom, who had decided the year before to go to take the job at Wake Forest. I mean, if Dave had known that Terry was going to step down soon, he probably wouldn't have taken that job. We learned, many years later. But he had taken the job at Wake Forest, and he didn't want to disrespect Wake Forest by, being there for a year and then taking going to Virginia. So he didn't even put himself in the search. And then Virginia searches high and wide. I mean, there were a lot of good names that popped up in very short order. I mean, I went back, of course, I remember some of this, but also went back and researched just to refresh my memory. I mean, Mike Montgomery, who was at Stanford and ended up staying at Stanford for a long time and winning a lot of games at Stanford, was one of the finalists for this job. Pete Gillen, who was at that time in 1990 at Xavier, who would become the coach years later at Virginia, he was a finalist for the job. Rick Barnes, who's still winning lots of games now at Tennessee, was a finalist and ended up getting offered the job, taking the job, and then changing his mind at the last minute. And so what happened then was after you told everybody else, nope, this was our first choice, all those other the second and third choices didn't want to have their name back in the mix anymore. And Virginia ended up with the assistant coach, Jeff Jones, who won 21 games a year. He had 105 wins in his first 5 years. His 15 went to the Elite Eight. But then 3 years later, he was gone after two losing seasons in 3 years. I say all that to say, Scott, okay, you just said, can we say that Ron Sanchez hasn't played his way back into the job? What if there's any similarity to this search and you've got choices 1A and 1B and maybe a 1C and 1D, and you put all your eggs into one basket and you throw it into the one guy, and then the one guy at the last minute does a Rick Barnes, and then you're back to square one. Your square one might end up being your coach.
Well, that's a possibility. And from what we have learned from our various sources is that this is not a one person decision, but a group of highly respected individuals around the UVA basketball program. When I say highly respectable, I'm almost talking to Mount Rushmore of UVA basketball. Would you not agree with that?
I would even say Mount Olympus. Screw Mount
Right,
Rushmore. That's a tourist trap. This
right,
is going and talking to the gods.
right.
uh,
But the thing that concerns me is that yeah, these folks can bring that person to the table, but when the door gets closed, is the ultimate person that's responsible for getting that signature on the contract capable of closing the deal?
well, so you're suggesting, and I don't understand this at all. You're suggesting Carla Williams wouldn't be able to get the person to sign the contract. I don't
Uh,
think that's the issue as much as there are so many factors that when you're talking, because you're talking about whoever it is, and then we'll talk about who it is in a second. But whoever it is your top choice. He's working somewhere now. He's under contract somewhere now. That's a given at this pay. You're not looking for somebody who's not a coach somewhere. Um, and so he's got a job now. He's probably done a good job at that job because you wouldn't be looking at him if he wasn't doing a good job at his current job. He's probably getting paid a good amount of money at that job. And the people there probably like him too, because if they didn't, you probably would have found that out and you'd found out why they didn't like him in your vetting. And you probably would say, if they don't like him, maybe we won't like him in a couple of years. So we don't want the guy. So the guy's paid well, he's winning, he's liked where he is. And then those people this guy might tell you, I really would love your job. If you offer me your job, I'll definitely consider it. I'll probably take it. And then those other people might say, well, we like you so much and you're here and you own a house here and your kids are going to school here. Let's give you more money. We'll give you more NIL money and don't leave. That's not Carla Williams not being able to finalize the deal. That's what happened with Rick Barnes 35 years ago.
right, I did, and so I'm going to give you a little backstory on that, and this comes from a very credible source that you and I both know, so I know that this is true. So the and you were much younger than I am, so you might not have followed this quite as close, but from what I'm hearing and have heard since 1990, um, the regret of the UVA athletic director at the time, and I believe that was Billy Copeland, if I'm correct, was that he allowed Rick Barnes to walk out of University Hall without signing the contract. Everything looked good to Rick Barnes. I hope you're looking that up because I hope I just
Jim
didn't throw
Copeland.
Yeah,
Jim
Jim
Copeland.
Copeland. I mean, Billy was his brother that played football at UVA. Um, that Jim Copeland's publicly stated the one regret he had was letting Rick Barnes leave University Hall without signing the contract that was right in front of him. And that Rick Barnes had verbally said, everything looks perfect, but I want to go back home and I want to think about it on my ride back home, which was a flight. And it was during that flight that who knows? I don't know if cell phones were
They wouldn't have.
prevalent, or when he got off the flight, that the Providence folks literally opened the bank vault for Barnes, and he reneged on his either his verbal commitment or his verbal. I don't think he had signed the contract, but um, so it
But here's
does ultimately fall on Carl. It does fall on the person that's getting that contract signed.
here's the flip side of that. Tony Bennett left Virginia when he visited with with Ron Sanchez, and was impressed with everything. Went back home and said, "I'm not going to take the job." And
Right,
then his wife talked him into it. So we it worked out in our favor that
right.
his impression when he left here was not the same as it was when he got back home. I mean, so that could
Two
go either
different
way.
scenarios.
It's the same scenario. It just worked out differently. As far as that goes, no, it's not about. It's not going to be if Carlo Williams can't get the job done. It's going to be because if I'm okay, we'll talk about the number one guy is Shaka Smart. If I'm Shaka Smart, and we know that contacts have been made and that um, there's mutual interest expressed there as far as this job goes with Shaka Smart and UVA. Um, you know, if I'm him, it's not even a matter of I want to go back to Marquette. I want to go fly back to Wisconsin and then get them to offer me more money. It's I'm making a life-changing decision, and I want to make sure it's right, and it's kind of like when you're out buying a new car, right? I mean, you don't if I'm sure there are certainly a lot of people out there who will just let the salesperson sell them on the car. But
Right,
you want to if the smart people sleep on it,
right.
and so I wouldn't I don't understand throwing Carla Williams into this discussion and saying she might not get the job done, and that's why we're going to end up with a bad coach. It's it's got to work out, it's got to work out for everybody, and so yes, Shaka Smart there. Of course I've written about this, and we've lots of folks now because of us writing about it have now know that that name is out there. But I mean, Shaka Smart there's a lot to him that fits UVA basketball and what UVA as an institution wants to do with its athletics programs. And it's when you hear the name and you start considering Shaka Smart as a possible top candidate here, it makes too much sense that this could be the way it ends.
He's definitely has to be choice 1A. I mean, he's got the resume, and as I've learned, it's as much about the fit between the coach and the university. And if anyone doesn't see a fit between Shaka Smart and UVA, then they don't know the full story behind Shaka Smart, because as much as getting Shaka Smart to UVA is getting Mrs. Shaka Smart to UVA, because he's a
Maya
very
Smart.
distinguished,
Yeah.
yeah, very distinguished professor at Marquette University that is going to be needing a job unless they plan on living in two cities, which I highly doubt. So that's going to be the sell there, just as important as the sell to Shaka Smart on to UVA. So he's definitely got the resume. He's won at VCU, didn't win as big as people thought he should have won at Texas. And now is at Marquette, as you and I have talked about. That's not his destination job. That's his job to restore his resume. And he's done so. So um, now now he's on to his destination job again. So yeah, he has to be the leader in, so to speak, at this stage of the game. One thing back to Carla Williams is that I want to further. I'm not saying she can't get the job done or there's concern there. I'm actually thinking just the opposite is that, yeah, we know of this group of people assembled, whatever you want to call it, to vet coaches, to bring coaches her. So she's a very important part of this too. So, when that coach gets in front of her in her office in the new football facility, she's got the weight of pretty heavy weight on her to close that deal because she knows that's the person that they want that has been vetted. So she's an integral part of this. So I'm not saying there's concern that she can't get the job done. I just don't want to. She's still a very important part of the job.
I want to point out something you made me read, Scott. I did eventually read. There was a column on the search by a Hall of Fame sports writer in Virginia who threw a couple of odd ideas out. One that the VCU job is probably as good as the UVA job now, which we'll talk about in a minute or two because there's another candidate, obviously, that we'll discuss here at length. And the other is, all right, so because of our reporting, we had the identity of the Atlanta's search firm that the athletics department contracted with back in October. And this Hall of Fame sports writer seemed to be under the impression that that search firm is the only entity out there looking at candidates, and they were going to present candidates. As we know, because we don't just one crib on other people's reporting. That was our reporting that this person wrote about. They didn't do that reporting themselves. Anyway, but we know that firm's job isn't to come up with candidates. That firm's job is to they're given the names of people, and their job is to check out everything about them, do the research behind the scenes. But their job was not to come up with the candidates. Their job was to to do the dirty work, to do the grunt work. But if you did reporting on this, you'd know that. If you were just cribbing off of other people's reporting, you wouldn't necessarily know that. But I'm not in any Hall of Fames or anything.
Well, the Fringe Media Hall of Fame. I hear you're up for induction.
Yeah, that will get me a gift certificate for a half off on a Whopper,
A
uh,
junior Whopper.
junior Whopper. Yeah,
Junior.
yeah,
As
with
I
a
said in
purchase
the
of fries
text,
and a drink.
you would be in the ABA Hall of Fame compared to the NBA. But if you did any research, the ABA Hall of Famers in their prime would probably mop the floor up with some of the NBA Hall of Famers because the ABA has some pretty good darn names like Julius Erving and
Yeah,
so. But back to that. That was a sad article because there was. Yeah, I'm going to say it. There was absolutely no research done on that. If anyone thinks the VCU job, or for that matter, the Marquette job is comparable to the UVA job, then they've done absolutely no back work on that. And I know I've covered VCU a few times this year. I live close to Richmond. I've gone down because they are a good team. The folks down there have told me that the problem they're going to have is that the revenue just doesn't match up with what some of these other schools that'll be calling on the VCU coach Ryan Odom. They just can't match it, and that they have had conversations with Odom and have told him once the House, I guess it's the decision about revenue sharing, is that VCU is going to commit a huge portion of that to the basketball program, but a huge proportion of a little amount is still a little amount, right? So
yeah.
that's not going to get the job done. And Ryan is smart. He's comes from a great coaching family with his dad Dave. And if you look at what VCU's doing this year, he starts 4 fifth-year seniors. His top player off the bench, I believe, is a fifth-year senior. They're all gone next year. He starts over, and at VCU, that's going to be the MO every year is you starting over and moving forward. You're not starting over with fifth-year seniors because that's going to go by I think it ends this year. And no coach wants to do that. So to think that the job at VCU, the job at Marquette is not a sizable step up, is almost journalism malpractice.
It's laughable that, yeah, I mean, and as you know, as you said, you've been there at VCU a few times this season. I mean, chatting around the periphery. You get folks who don't know Scott, when he goes and covers a game, he doesn't just show up right before tip and leave right after the game is over. He's there. He pretty much should have to pay taxes. He's there so long, and you talk to people and you find out, and the people who are associated with the program say we don't have the money to compete, and that's the problem. And that which is a great feather in the cap of all the coaches they've had there, including Shaka Smart back
They've
in the
done a
day,
great job. Look at the Shaka Smart,
Anthony
uh,
Grant.
Anthony Grant, Will Wade.
Yeah.
Um, we thought of a couple others.
Now Ryan Odom.
Now Ryan Odom. So whoever's
Uh,
hiring the
Jeff
coaches,
Capel was before
Jeff
all of
Cable,
them. Yeah, that was where it
um,
started.
their ads are doing a similar job to Jeff Bourne, what Jeff Bourne did at JMU. Um, he had a successful hire after a successful hire after a successful hire in football.
You got to get it. If you're the VCU athletics director, you've had to get it right like 7 or 8 straight times in the last 25 years, and they've gotten it right every time.
Yeah, so that's a credit to those folks that they've done their job so well. But that's where VCU is in the pecking order,
Yeah.
and to not understand that coaches aren't, that's not their destination job unless something changes in the pecking order of college basketball. The ACC is still going to be light years ahead of the Atlantic 10 and considerably ahead of the Big East because neither of those conferences play big time football outside of Connecticut in the Big East. And I think there's a many that would say, does Connecticut play big time football in the Big East?
Their job is to get paid to lose to teams
Right.
that need somebody to schedule. And if they screw up and win, even better for them. But no, and even if the point of the writer who brought this silly point up was, well, they'll have more resources to be able to compete in their own leagues. Okay, well, great. The A10 is a one bid league.
Right.
And VCU this year, I mean, I've been covering because the A10 race is in Virginia this year. It's a conference that spreads out halfway across the country. St. Louis is in the conference. But the A10 race is between VCU and George Mason. VCU,
And those, I watched that playoff game. That what would you call that game Saturday? That was a game that the loser was probably playing themselves into a situation that they had to win the Atlantic 10 tournament.
yeah, probably so, because I was getting ready to say VCU.
Elimination game.
Elimination game type, yeah. Because even VCU, their net, when I looked at it last night after the games of Wednesday night, I think it was 29 they were in the net. But if they'd lost that game, they would have certainly gone down several spots. And George Mason is right now at 65. They would have bumped up maybe into the low to mid 50s. But VCU loses that game, and then if they lose the A10 tournament, they're a bubble team. They might get in, they might not get in. George Mason, even with a win in that game, probably still needs to win the A10 tournament. Their preseason, their non-conference schedule was really weak, and they had a couple of losses early on as they were getting their feet under them. And so, no, the A10 is a one bid league. It didn't used to be that way. I mean, that's the reason that George Mason and VCU and Richmond jumped from the CAA, over a decade ago, was, they wanted to go into a league that wasn't a one bid league, and now the A10's a one bid league because everybody, so many schools keep jumping up the ladder that it's just what it is. But this year it's a one bid league. So to have the most money in a one bid league, well, it's the old Frank DeFord saying when the world's tallest midget, the nicest person in prison. When if you have the most resource, if you lose a game in March in a tournament in a one bid league, it doesn't matter if you had the most money, you're still playing in the NIT. So Ryan Odom, who is candidate 1B and a close 1B in this race, and if Virginia ends up with Ryan Odom, good for us that we still get Ryan Odom. He's going to do a good
That's
job.
the scenario you hope to paint yourself. That's the corner you hope to paint yourself in, is that a win-win scenario.
If Shaka Smart ends up staying at Marquette and getting a big raise for some reason, and we end up with Ryan Odom, we end up with a damn good coach. But yeah, and if he doesn't, if he's not at Virginia, he's
He's
going
going to be somewhere.
he's going to be somewhere. There's other jobs out there that are attractive that are going to he's going to be a top candidate for if he's not already a top candidate for.
Yeah, I was at the game Saturday against George Mason. Great environment. The Siegel Center is, it's a nice little. It's like the Wrigley Park of college basketball. It's small. It's compact. It's like an oversized high school gym.
It's
Actually,
loud when
it's
they're loud
it's
in
very
there, man.
loud. Um, but I was sitting beside a beat writer for someone up in not the Post, but one of the regional papers up in you talk about getting buried in your metropolitan area. George Mason is probably more buried than Boston College is in Boston. They have to basically, he was telling me they have to call in their games to the Post.
Oh no. Okay.
I guess they talk to a stringer of some type to get their even home games. So that game Saturday for the 7,000 fans that were there, and VCU had a pretty good contingent, maybe 1,500 actually, and they were loud. Um, that was for those fans. It was a game between two teams, between the George Mason players and the VCU players. But for a lot of people that knew them, and this was before the article came out about the VCU job, the Marquette job, maybe not being a step down from the UVA job. That was before then. It was clear that that game Saturday was about two coaches better positioning themselves for their next job because um, Tony Skinn, is that
That's
Skeen?
his name. Yeah, the George
Uh,
Mason coach. Yeah, yeah.
he's not going to be a George Mason,
He's an
um,
alum who played on the Final Four team,
but
but
he's still not going to be a George Mason.
he's doing a great job there in 2 years. He won 21 last year. He's already got 22 this year. He's not long for being there. I agree with
No,
you.
he's an alum at George Mason that's currently coaching the George Mason Patriots, but within a year or two, he's going to be an alumnus of George Mason University that's coaching at some bigger school, maybe the ACC, maybe the Big East. That might be a jump, but neither of those coaches are going to be at their schools within the next 2 years, and you could sense it. Chris, there was some showmanship going on there between the two guys, and I don't know if they were actually realizing that they were doing that, but just their body language, the way they coach, they were very demonstrative, and I was impressed by both of them. I'm very impressed. We talked about if Virginia ends up with Ryan Odom, believe me, that is not 1B. Ryan Odom is a perfect fit for UVA in that he reeks of what UVA wants to have in her coach. There's not going to be much drop off from Tony Bennett from even Ron Sanchez to Ryan Odom. If we end up with Ryan, that's a pretty good consolation prize.
I'm looking at the recent coaches at the two schools you're just talking about there. The VCU coaches we were chatting about. Jeff Capel, Anthony Grant, Shaka Smart, Will Wade. The only guy in this list, Mike Rhodes, ended up getting the Penn State job. He's not done a great job there yet, but he's got that job. And it's a Power Five job, obviously. At George
Now, Mike
Mason,
Rhodes succeeded Shrewsbury, right?
he succeeded Shrewsbury. Yeah.
So Mike Rhodes may be playing himself to a job in the ACC because Shrewsbury certainly didn't distinguish himself much at Penn State. I don't know. I still can't follow. I think that was a package deal.
He was only at Penn State for 2 years. Yeah,
two
it was
years,
kind
but
of an
he also
elevation.
brought his son, right?
He brought his son, and it ain't worked out.
Hasn't worked out. Uh,
Skin's most recent predecessor was a guy named Kim English, who got the job at Providence, and he won 20 games last year, 21 games last year, 12 and 16 this year. But I mean, you look back at, obviously other George Mason coaches include Jim Larinaga, who used that job to get the Miami job, which he did a pretty good job with, obviously. So, I mean, yeah, those jobs are stepping stone jobs. And both VCU and George Mason, both Shaka Smart and Jim Larinaga went to Final Fours from those jobs, but then they left because there were better jobs out there for them. And so, and that was the case 10 years ago. It's the case now. Yeah, let's get it back to Virginia then.
One thing to Virginia in our closing minutes, let's talk about how much do you think timing plays into this? So I'm just going to throw this out. Our Virginia's basketball season is going to end the moment we lose in the ACC tournament.
Yeah,
Whether that's Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday night, Wednesday afternoon, somewhere along Wednesday. Maybe
yeah.
we even win a couple and get to Thursday. But as soon as our time in the ACC tournament ends, so does the season. So let's just give it the benefit of the doubt and say we played a Thursday, and which would be the 12th, I think, of March, 13th of March. What if these other schools are still? How long do we wait? What
Well,
if Shaka
you have
Smart
to
is
wait.
your choice, and Shaka Smart is in a deep run with Marquette, but VCU is a one that gets it into does make it to the NCAA tournament, which I expect them to,
Yeah.
and is a one and done. And there's the VCU coach Ryan Odom sitting there, available. Do you wait another couple of weeks on the Marquette job to possibly come open, or do you go with plan 1B?
I don't know that you make a decision for the next 5 to 10 to 15 years of your program based on a week or two. Which is to say, if you have decided now, and again, what we know now could change over the next couple of weeks, but what we
It
know
could.
now is the decision is they really want Shaka Smart, and that's where all the search committee people, the money people have said that's who we want. That's our number one. If that's your choice, and then also you have done your due diligence, and we'll assume they've done so, and they've got the word back from Shaka Smart that he is interested, and if the offer is made, that he will take it, and you have confidence in that. You have to wait. You have to wait because it's not about a couple of weeks. It's about, again, I mean, you're going to sign him to a 6 year deal. That's the standard now. It used to be a 5 year deal with standard. Now it's 6 year deal. You're going to sign him to a 6 year deal. And, either of these guys, so Shaka's 47. I think Ryan Odom's 52. So either of these guys is going to be around presumably for 10 years, 15 years. You hope. It means they've done a
You
good job.
hope. You hope.
And so if that's the case, and you've gone through 6 months now of research and vetting and everything else, and this is the guy we want, but he's not going to be available for 2 weeks. You don't base your next 15 years on 2 weeks, as far as I'm concerned. That's not how I would make the decision.
So I'm going to throw a wrench into that. What if, and I'm just playing,
Yeah.
the overly cautious, the cup's half full person instead of the cup half empty, or maybe it's the cup half empty in this scenario. What if you don't have that firm commitment from Shaka? Yes, I'm interested. Yes, I want to come talk. But you do have the firm commitment from Ryan Odom that says, I want the job, period. I will sign in 3 days.
But I've also got other legs in the irons in the fire, and if I don't get something from you, I may look at those others.
Exactly. And we know those others are not going to be, for Ryan, are not going to be as attractive as the Virginia job for numerous reasons.
Yeah,
One, the job itself, the resources at UVA, which we know are among the best in the country.
yeah.
So yeah, he might have some other irons in the fire, but we know that they're not going to be as hot as the job that he has had offered to him. Do you still wait on a Shaka Smart who's not giving you that commitment?
I think if that's the scenario and you don't have a feeling that there's going to be a guarantee that Shaka Smart is, there's no guarantees, but a 98% certainty that Shaka Smart, the guy you've determined to be your number one choice, is going to take the job, that he may waver in his commitment, and then you got a Ryan Odom that is ready to sign. That's a different scenario. I mean, to me,
To
you know,
me, that is.
that, but that, that's but that's different because of the lack of wavering, the wavering commitment or lack of firm commitment versus a firm commitment.
Right.
And also, though, it also, I mean, this is one thing I'm not privy to. Maybe you aren't either. Like, I'm sure there's criteria that the UVA's the folks that we've been in contact with, they've probably got a pretty detailed checklist. I would be surprised if the people that we know who are on this committee don't have a spreadsheet that has numbers all over it and they've weighed it out. And if they're close, then you say, okay, we're going to go with the guy that we know wants the job. What if, though, even in that scenario, it's like, hey, God, the number one choice is not just number one. He is, shooting star. I mean, we have to get this guy. So, that's the one. We know that these are the two finalists as far as what we've been told, and we are confident is this case. But we don't know about any gap between one and two. We just don't. No, like, it's a fair thing to go into. It's definitely a fair thing to think about because you
Because
know
you don't want to get Rick Barnes again.
you don't want to get.
And the other obstacle with Shaka, now I will elaborate a little bit more, is that with Shaka, it's a package deal. He's very much family man. His wife, professor, very distinguished professor at Marquette. Um, they don't see how I had this put to me. That decision of Shaka is not his decision, it's a they decision.
Well, and I've even been in contact with, and I haven't reported on this because, as we get closer, maybe I will, but someone who knows the Smarts and knew them when they were at VCU. From this person who knows them, the word is that they were at VCU. They were very cognizant of and impressed with the work that the University of Virginia does in the state of Virginia to reach out to minority communities and to disadvantaged communities to make a difference. And that's important to them. They want to, wherever they are, they want to make a difference. And so factor that in. I mean, of course, also factor in now that the Board of Visitors has a MAGA majority and is trying to change things and take DEI out of it and make DEI into a bad word, almost the new N word. But that's going to change too. When the governor changes this fall, that'll go back. Fortunately, but that's got to be a factor. I mean, they like UVA's reputation in the African American community, and so and they know that UVA could be a platform for what they want to do outside of basketball, both in terms of education and also just being impactful and Virginia. The state of Virginia has a sizable African American community. Nationwide, African Americans make up about 12% of the population, but in Virginia, it's over 20% of the population. And so, if that's a value to you, you can do so much at a place like UVA that you can't do it at a private school in Wisconsin. So yeah, that's a factor here as well.
The one last thing I'll say about that decision is that from what I won't say I've been told, but from what I have interpreted, don't think for a second that if Shaka Smart or Ryan Odom is the choice, that the university does not know that once they have made the offer and has been accepted, that either of those two are going to use UVA as a I would say as a Frank Beamer situation when the job at North Carolina, he took the job and then came back and parlayed that into a huge raise at Virginia Tech. These two individuals, the university, the committee, whatever, they know their character and they know that what they have discussed and put into place, if it's accepted, it's accepted.
Well, I would caution there. You never know.
Yeah, we still got the Rick Barnes scenario.
I would just caution you. You never know because, and that's why I think that we've reported on other names that have popped up from the search committee having interest in. As soon as some of the names popped up, Scott Drew's name popped up. Well, Scott Drew at Baylor, who's been there for over 20 years, he was up as a potential top candidate for a couple of jobs last year, high profile jobs, Kentucky and Louisville, which are two pretty high profile jobs. And then he signs an extension and gets a lot more money out of Baylor. So me and also the Iowa State coach's name popped up, and he recently signed an extension at Iowa State. I don't know that I want a guy who, yeah, I don't want a guy who's already got a history of using outside interest to get more money because he's just using you to get more money, and that's
Right.
fine. It's the capitalist society. We all want to get more money, but I don't want you using me in my job to get that. I want a real guy who wants my job. So that's probably why those names aren't in the mix anymore, to be blunt about it.
Yeah, and we don't know if they were ever in the mix. The Iowa State coach,
Well, the Iowa State coach was never mentioned to us.
no,
Scott Drew was mentioned to
yeah,
us.
right. The Iowa State coach has a huge buyout. You
Well,
really
and he just signed an extension in December.
right, right. I think his buyout we ascertained was somewhere around $11 million.
It's not, yeah, the Iowa's public records laws are different than Virginia's. So even the folks out there are guessing, but they're saying at least 10 million, probably somewhere between 10 and 15. But he just signed an extension in December. There's no,
Right.
and plus he was never mentioned to us by anybody that we've talked with on the search committee as being a candidate. That was thrown out there by people outside who were just speculating, which is fine. I will just make a point that stuff that we've reported, that Scott and I have reported in the last 4 months, has not been who we want to be the coach because it doesn't matter who we want to be the coach. We've been reporting to you what we're told the people who actually have the decision to make want to be the coach, and so that's what we've stuck with our reporting.
Exactly. I wouldn't have. Well, I don't know. I think a lot of Ryan Odom known him since he was a little kid at UVA. He's a great person. His dad, I know his dad extremely well. But would that be my choice? Would that have been my choice? Well, my phone hasn't rang and no one's asked me, so
Yeah,
no, don't have that input. But I like the direction that those folks that are seemingly do have that input or have a huge amount of input. I like the direction they're going in. They've done a great. This has been a very thorough process.
Scott, we were both on October 18th. We'll wrap up here in the next minute or two. We were both on October 18th at the press conference where Tony Bennett announced his decision to retire. I stood there with Carla Williams, asked the question, "What's the process playing out?" And she said, a national search process will be initiated. And from October 18th to now, let's see, November, December, January, February, 4 months. And the 4 months have led to this. I feel pretty solid about where they are in this process. It's gone beyond what we know and can't even talk about. It's gone beyond what I would have expected. And if it leads to the hire that we think is going to be the hire, this will be a home run process.
Definitely. And as much as we have um, knocked Carla Williams around, if this, I think, regardless of whether these two names ends up, maybe it's someone comes out of left field that we haven't heard about yet, but I doubt that. But um,
I'd be shocked based
I
on
would
the
be shocked,
insight
but I
we've been
still
given.
think
Yeah.
that Carla Williams deserves a lot of credit for letting this process run out the way it has.
The credit I'll give her is that she's taken the advice and counsel of some very smart people, and that's what smart people do. You don't assume that you know everything. I've gotten emails from people saying, "Well, why can't she just do it? That's her job." Well, her job is to run an entire athletics department and hire people. And the way you hire people is if I'm hiring a softball coach, if I'm hiring a squash coach, I go find experts in softball or squash and say, "Who do you recommend?" And so you've got people at UVA with a ream of knowledge about how basketball works. You don't just say, "Well, I'm smarter than they are. I'll find somebody," or "I'll hire some." headhunter firm and they'll find somebody for me. You go to the quality people that you've got and in the UVA basketball family and you say, help me find somebody. And that's what she's done.
Yeah, and from what we know about this committee, that vast amount of knowledge is not just concentrated in one area, but it's spread out from the hierarchy of the way the finances work, the way the scouting works, to the actual knowing the way the different conferences around the country work and how coaches fit in and how coaches have progressed up the ladder. You're right. That's not the Mount Rushmore of UVA basketball. It's Mount Olympus.
If only our political parties used a similar process to nominate candidates for president, we would have so much better of a country because the people who are involved in this process have that level of knowledge about what they're getting involved in
I've
here.
always said that the sports people should be running the country.
There we go. There we go. I think that's a good way to end this here. Well, for our listeners and viewers out there, of course, keep up with Augusta Free Press. Have been on top of this for months. We're going to continue to be so. Scott German doing an important part of the legwork here. Me putting my name on a lot of these stories. So for Scott German, I'm Chris Graham signing off. Everyone have a great day.